Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at the worst books I have read according to Goodreads. I saw Nick from another booktube channel doing this video and thought it would be a lot of fun. Plus, I don't like to be overly negative on the channel, so using Goodreads as a barometer of what people see as a not so great book seemed like a good cop out here. I also have a couple other fun stats, like what is the highest rated book on Goodreads that I've given the lowest rating to, vice versa. So just a few other things that I have also mixed in here as well. So let's go ahead and start this list with, I think this is the 7th worst book I have read according to Goodreads, and that is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. The Goodreads rating on this is 3.39, and I actually gave this book a 2-star. This is, if you don't know, this is kind of a gothic horror story that is quite famous. I think it has a couple of different adaptations, and overall, I don't remember too much from this book. I do remember not enjoying it, and I think the horror elements that are supposed to be there, that are supposed to be creepy and kind of unsettling, I just found to be kind of boring. And I remember not really connecting with anything that's going on and really, I don't want to say zoning out, but I very quickly realized that this wasn't a book I was going to love. And it's a very short book, so I kind of just powered through and was like, did not enjoy my time with it. I can definitely see the merits to it. There are definitely some decent elements in there, but for me, it did not work. And it also looks like a lot of the Goodreads people agree with me. And I was off by one. That was the 6th worst book I have read, according to Goodreads. At number 5 is Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. The Goodreads rating for this is a 3.34, and I gave it a 3-star rating. Now, I think this is one of those books where a lot of people either really like it. I can remember reading this because Murphy Napier and Jimmy from the Fantasy Network both loved this book. They talked so highly of it, and I was like, wow, they're raving about it. It's super short. I've got to see what it is. And after reading it, I did not nearly get to the same highs that they did, but I also didn't get to the same lows that so many other people seem to have about it. I seem to be one of the few people who is more in the middle about this book. This is really a kind of, I want to say coming of age story, but it's really a group of kids who are kind of leaving their past and childhood behind. And the last thing they really do is they make a prank where they bring in a mannequin to a movie theater, and then all kinds of strange things happen from there. And I think it is one of those books where if you read it not looking and trying to put pieces together, it's a very strange tale and you're not really going to get a whole lot from it. And even knowing that, I still don't think I got a whole lot out of it. But this is a book where you kind of have to try to read between the lines, and I think there's a lot of allegories for a lot of different things going on. And it, like I said, it is a pretty bizarre book. I can definitely see why some people can be so attached to it, because it is a very different writing experience, or reading experience, not writing experience. I will say Stephen Graham Jones' writing, on the other hand, seems to be kind of hit and miss for other people. I looked at some of his other books, and that seems to be kind of a common thread with him, that you either really connect with his actual writing or not. And I don't know if I'll read another book by him, but this one was just fine for me. I liked it. I gave it 3 stars. Number 4 hurts me to say, because this comes from one of my favorite authors, and that is Across the River and Through the Trees by Ernest Hemingway. The Goodreads ratings for this is a 3.31, and I gave this a 3-star rating. I do think this is probably the worst Ernest Hemingway book I have read. It really focuses on a romance of a colonel and an 18-year-old in a war, and he, like, if I remember correctly, he refers to her as like daughter or something kind of strange throughout the book, and the main character has a terminal illness that he knows he is dying from, and the book kind of follows how they're handling this romance and like the impending doom at the end of this. Like, there is no happy ending that they know of coming in this story. And it does still have that Ernest Hemingway prose that I love. It is probably my favorite thing about his writing. It's just the way it comes off the page, but I do remember just not enjoying too much of it. I think the thing that kept it above a 2-star rating for me was that writing. This is something, I read this a really long time ago, so a lot of the finer details are actually escaping me at this point. So maybe it's something I could reread and maybe get a different appreciation of it. But if I was going to reread a Hemingway, this would be really far down the list. So I can kind of see why it is low on the Goodreads ratings, especially you come to a writer like Hemingway and you hear so many positives about him. To get something like this, especially if this is your first experience with him, I can definitely see it being quite off-putting. Next up is another classic by Mr. Kipling, and that is The Mark of the Beast. And the Goodreads rating for this is a 3.30, and I give it a 3-star rating. This is an interesting tale. It's really kind of a werewolf story, but it takes place in India, and I think there are definitely some problematic things that happen coming from this writer. I think he has a pretty problematic history in of itself. But overall, I remember it being an interesting aspect because it seemed like he was trying to not use, I don't know how prevalent werewolves were at this point in literature, like when that really came to be something, but there is some interactions with Indian shaman and just all kinds of different elements that ends up with somebody becoming a werewolf, basically, is what happens. I don't know if it's necessarily a humanoid werewolf or if they just become a wolf in general, but that is what the Mark of the Beast is. I'm really spoiling this book, I guess, but I don't really recommend that you read it. It's fine. Like I said, it has some merit to it, but overall, it seems like most people don't like it, and there are much better things that you could probably spend your time reading. Next up is a book I think a lot of people had to read in middle school here in the States, and that is The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane, and that has a 3.29 rating on Goodreads, and I gave it a 3-star. I wonder if that rating does have anything to do with probably a lot of people were forced to read it. I will say this is a revolutionary story tale. You follow a young boy kind of getting, I don't even think he gets enlisted. I think he, lies about his age and goes to fight, and you kind of just see some of the horrors and tragedies and just all kinds of things of the war. And, I don't remember a whole lot. I think the one thing I maybe remember the most is there's like an amputation scene or something in this book, or maybe I'm getting that mixed up with, what's that movie? I can't remember it. I really can't remember, but it is another Revolutionary War tale. And, this book has some decent merit to it. And maybe if I had read it when I was a little bit younger, maybe I would have appreciated it. But as an adult, I didn't really think it was anything too special. I think there are probably much better reading experiences if you want to go into the Revolutionary War, and this one just left a little bit to be desired. Like I said, it was a 3-star book. I had a decent time with it. I didn't hate it or anything, but it's just kind of an average book that for the most part has left my mind. And now for the worst book I have read according to Goodreads, and that is Zone 1 by Colson Whitehead. Goodreads has this rated at a 3.26, and I gave it a 3-star rating. I was really surprised to see this as the lowest rated book that I have read according to Goodreads. I remember this being a somewhat interesting zombie tale. That is what this story is about. You are following our main character as he's working through zones of a city, trying to clear it for, there's been a zombie apocalypse. And there are definitely some interesting things that happen in here. As far as a zombie story goes, it definitely is lacking. I remember the middle of this book just being really boring, but I remember the ending also being not that great, but also an interesting thought experiment. I won't spoil it in case you do want to go read it, even though it's the lowest rated one here. But overall, I think this is also a writer who has some other very highly thought of books, but in general, I think it was fine. I'm not upset I read it. It was a good time, but it is not a book that sticks in my mind at all. When I saw that it was the lowest rated one, I was surprised because I remember the zombies in the ending, but that was pretty much it. And now for some other stats that I wanted to look up about books. I looked up The Spy Who Loved Me, which was a very different James Bond, Ian Fleming book. It is also a very low rated book on my Goodreads. I think it was in the top 15 or something at a 3.4, and I gave it a 4-star rating. I think that maybe is because I read all of the James Bond books kind of back to back, at least one a month. And I think to get such a different perspective, that book does not take place from the POV of James Bond. It takes place from a woman. And I just found it really interesting to see Fleming writing from a woman's perspective and her life. And I mean, it is barely a spy thriller whatsoever, just very small sections of it. But overall, I really liked that book, and Goodreads did not agree with me. I also wanted to see what my lowest rated Sanderson book was. If you don't know, last year I read all of the Cosmere, and the lowest rated one is kind of a cheat because it's Alamancer Jack in the Pits of Elian, which is a really short novella that takes place in between Era 2 about a character that you don't really ever get introduced to. He's a sub-character in newspapers that you can read while you're reading this book, Era 2. I give it a 3-star rating, and the Goodreads rating for that was 3.45. Like I said, it was fine. It was super short, completely unnecessary. I don't think you really need to read it, but I was curious on what the lowest rated Sanderson book I read was. And then one other book that I thought very highly of, that was Snow Country by, I'm not gonna get the first name right, but Kiwababa. It's a Japanese book, and the Goodreads rating is 3.59, and I gave it a 4-star. I really like this book. Speaking of Ernest Hemingway, this was a book that reminded me a lot of Hemingway's writing. It takes place in Japan in the wintertime, and it is about our main character who is going and seeing a prostitute, and which sounds like a very strange book to like, but I found this book to be very human and very beautifully written. I don't know if a lot of people would like it. I guess apparently not, because it's kind of lowly rated, but it is a very beautiful book. And obviously we are coming out of winter here in the Northern Hemisphere, but if you are looking for a good winter read, this really sets the beauty of Japan in winter. And to finish off the video, let's go ahead and talk about my highest rated book that Goodreads has the lowest rated. So that would be The Jungle by Upton St. Clair. I think a lot of people know about this book because they talk about its impact on the meat industry. I did give this a 5-star rating, and Goodreads has it down at a 3.77. Talk about a story that just makes you feel for an immigrant coming to the United States. I think a lot of people probably turn away from this book at the end. There is a lot of political, I don't want to say propaganda, but there's a big political push at the end of this book that is really trying to, I don't know if it even wants to influence the reader. I don't know anything about Upton St. Clair's politics, but it definitely seems like he is trying to sell you specifically on socialism. And while that point of the book, I'm just kind of like, whatever. The early section of this book, it is one of the most harrowing and just traumatic reading experiences. And just, you want to talk about a character getting kicked while they're down over and over and over again. That is, I think you pronounce it Jurgis, I mean, it's just absolutely brutal. And you just see and feel for the people who were coming through at that time to America and just how awful everything was. And you can definitely see where some of the impact may have come from the meat industry, because there's definitely some like very graphic scenes. But this is a book I do highly recommend to everybody. I'm sure some people had to read it for school, but I think looking back at this as an adult is totally worth it. It's not a fantasy book, which is what I normally read here, but it is 100% worth it. And now for the final one. It is the book I have the lowest rated, but Goodreads has the highest rating of, and that would be Circe by Madeline Miller. It has a 4.24 on Goodreads, and I gave this a 1-star book. It is one of 2 books I have given a 1-star, which means I absolutely hated it. To me, Circe by Madeline Miller is like if you wanted lemonade and the waiter brought you a cup of water, spritzed a lemon-scented freshener into the air around you, and then told you that was lemonade. It is like that version of a Greek retelling. I absolutely hated it. It felt like the most boring version of all of the events that happened. And you know, I heard so many people talking about how beautiful this book was and the writing and just all this stuff. And while the writing is very well done, the story itself, I don't care about Circe, the character. Just like I said, it is the exact opposite I want of a retelling. And I know I am super in the minority of that. Obviously, most people really like this. I see this being people's favorite books of all time, and just people glow about it. And for whatever reason, I just cannot connect with this book whatsoever. But that is all of my, or not all of my ratings, but that is a decent amount of my worst books according to Goodreads and some other fun stats. Let me know what your worst book is on Goodreads. I'd be curious on if you have read something that is truly, truly ranked very lowly by Goodreads, because mine, nothing even dipped into a 2, which is pretty amazing. But that's all for me. And as always, have a good one.